Time now for a bigger picture with Dr. Dan from Sioux Falls Hypnosis. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. I'm very good and excited to talk. We always have a little chat before we talk here, and half the time I'm like, we should have just waited and started the program because
we smartened up this time.
We didn't get quite as far in, but what we're going to talk about today, I think, is kind of a good thing to talk about because one of the things you'd mentioned is people sometimes are looking more for sympathy than they are for solutions.
Right. And this is something that it's just a feature of human beings.
Yeah.
It just is. And it plays itself out all over in our lives, because we're struggling with something and we're talking to our friends or we're talking to other people, or sometimes we're out seeking some kind of, professional help, or maybe we're, with a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, whatever it is. But one of the things about human beings that we all need to be aware of, or at least consider, is that we say we want to change things in our lives, but what we actually want is sympathy.
So we want somebody to say, I hear you, I understand.
Right.
I feel bad for you.
Right, because that's the thing that all of us feel like we didn't get enough of.
Yeah.
That's the thing we think is missing. We all feel misunderstood.
Yeah.
We all feel like the situation is unjust and unfair. And there's just a part of human beings that just wants to be heard on this. And we want so emotionally, what we're actually looking for is sympathy. And one of the problems is when we're not aware of that, when we start out, on a journey to change some aspect of ourselves or our lives or something like that. Yeah. And we know that it needs to be different. We understand that, and we start the process. But all of a sudden, what we get is, let's describe it as tough love, or what we get is held accountable or responsible for ourselves.
Absolutely.
And what we get is, an environment which requires us to walk the walk, as opposed to just talk the talk. And then all of a sudden, we become frustrated. We become unhappy. We start to feel, again, like the whole thing's unfair, like we're not being heard, like no one's listening to us. And then we withdraw from whatever that is, rather than staying in it, which is exactly where we need to be. And so one of the things is when what I always tell people is, if you're moving through the world and you're experiencing, I don't think they're listening to me, or I don't think I'm being understood, or I don't think this is fair, or chances are you're exactly where you need to be in that moment.
That's normal.
That is a normal response, and it's okay, but just to recognize that that's also a sign that suggests you need to stay where you are and hang in there.
Yeah.
Rather than what we normally do is we inflate a bunch of air into that until we can justify or rationalize moving away from it, withdrawing, not doing that anymore, not talking to those people, not handling that. Yeah. And this is one of the patterns that happens to all of us that keeps us stuck where we are.
And it's a lot easier in that scenario to just give up. So, that's probably why that happens more often than,
it's even worse than that. We don't just give up. We actually give ourselves permission to not change that.
Yeah.
And the fact that we didn't feel that emotional thing that we wanted to feel. We didn't feel sympathy. We didn't feel cared for. We didn't feel heard, supported, loved, whatever it is. That becomes the reason why we don't have to change.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And that is incredibly detrimental to us. And again, the fact that as soon as it feels unfair, as soon as it feels unjust, as soon as it feels like you're not being, and you start hearing that voice in your head, you are probably exactly where you need to be in that moment. And it's incredibly important that people realize that so that they can stay there, because sympathy is nice and it's warm and it's fuzzy, but it doesn't bring change.
Yeah,
it just makes us emotionally feel good.
Yeah.
It's like, like an emotional cookie of some kind, which is actually what we're out shopping for when we start talking about, I need to change this or that or whatever. What we're actually shopping for emotionally is that cookie, rather than someone who will hold us where we are, hold our feet to the fire, require that we walk the walk, require that we do what we actually said we wanted to do.
Yeah.
And this is a big problem, because as soon as someone does that, we begin to experience it like it's a problem, rather than what we actually asked for in the first place.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I had mentioned before we started the program here, there's a video, It's Not About the Nail. Mm-hmm. And for people that haven't seen that, it's been seen millions and millions of times. And so many people have shared it because it's so true. And there's a lady talking about this pain that she's experiencing, and it's just this splitting headache. And all the way through, you don't really see her very well. and her boyfriend is kind of staring at her forehead. She's got a nail literally sticking out of her forehead. And he's trying to solve the problem. He wants to remove the nail. And she keeps saying, it's not about the nail. What she really wanted was for him to just say, that sounds horrible.
Right.
And then she, at the very end, she's like, thank you. Thank you so much. Literally trying to help her remove the nail. And she was mad that he was trying to help her. But when he finally just says, that sounds horrible.
Right.
That must be a horrible thing.
And not that that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And not that it's a bad thing at all, because, it's a great thing. You start with, yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
Can I yank that sucker out?
But in order to change, if you have a splitting headache, in order to change it, you have to move to the point where you're actually doing what you need to do, where you're taking responsibility for that. And that's the really tricky moment when, in the dynamic where someone is asking for help or wants help or needs help or whatever, and they're talking to someone else about that, is it has to cycle around where we all have to be responsible for this now and accountable, and we have to do something. We either are accountable for that, or we begin that process where it's like, oh, I'm not being heard again. I'm not, and all of a sudden we're 6 again, and everything's unfair, and your bag of M&Ms has fewer M&Ms in it than mine.
Yeah.
And then, and we're right back in that again, and then all of a sudden that becomes the reason why I don't have to be responsible or accountable. I don't have to do anything about the nail now because you're not hearing me right.
Yeah.
And this happens to us over and over and over again.
And I'm the kind of guy that when I see a problem, I try to fix it. And sometimes I need to get better at just saying, that sounds like a really tough problem.
Right. That should be part of the thing. But it always has to move around and land on the point where, okay, what are we going to do now?
Yeah, absolutely.
What are we going to do? And, it becomes a problem when you do all of one and none of the other.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
If somebody listening is going, hey, you know what? I could use some help. I don't just want Dr. Dan to tell me, that sounds awful. I would like him to help me. Sioux Falls Hypnosis, I suggest for people to reach out to you because we've worked with you and it's a wonderful experience. How do they get a hold of you? What does the process look like?
You can find us on the internet at SiouxFallsHypnosis.com, or you can call us directly at 605-702-6691.
Very nice. And again, his website, SiouxFallsHypnosis.com.